It is also the 1-year anniversary for Hustler Fund. And that is an event we'll be bringing you live at around 8 or 9 a.m. So has Hustler Fund even been beneficial to you in terms of business? And definitely looking forward to see what other fund will be launched today in terms of what the president had promised. Welcome to Morning Cafe, and of course be part of this conversation at TV47 News on X, TV47 Kenya on Facebook. The hashtag is Morning Cafe.
Right, and because it's a Thursday, we always do this every single Thursday, giving you some tips on how to build your relationship. And this particular morning, we ask, is age just a number? We'll be having that particular conversation with the right minds this morning, discussing the whole bit of, you as a man, should you be going for younger or older? And as a lady, younger or older?
Yeah. What would you do? Anyway, speaking of numbers, there were very key matches yesterday in the UEFA Champions League, and two matches that would be of interest to us is Arsenal versus Lens and Galatasaray versus Manchester United. Now, interestingly, in both games, there were 12 goals in total, 6 goals for each match. Yeah. It's only that for the Galatasaray versus Manchester United, they had to share the spoils.
At this point, I think director, you can
3-3, and then when it came to Arsenal versus Lens, the goals went to one side.
Let's focus on the highlights.
Something to
big news in Kenya.
Let's take a look at the highlights.
Well, still on matters floods, we kick off with a top highlight this morning. The government is now threatens to prosecute motorists who attempt to cross flooded rivers as heavy rains continue to wreak havoc, with some reports indicating that the death toll may have reached 120.
Row over housing levy persists, with Azimio leader Raila Odinga asking employers to stop deducting the same from their employees following the High Court ruling that declared the levy unconstitutional.
Nairobi Governor Johnson Sakaja suspends Trump City Inspectorate officials after a spate of confrontations between county askaris and traders, motorists, as well as business owners in various parts of the city.
To the top story now, the government has now issued a warning to motorists across the country that they risk losing their driving licenses and subsequent prosecution for attempting to cross flooded sections of roads and bridges as El Nino rains continue to wreak havoc across the country. Cabinet Secretary Kipchumba Murkomen says that half the number of deaths recorded as a result of the flooding situation could have been avoided. So far, more than 100 people have died as a result of the heavy rains, with a huge number being carried away by flood water. On Tuesday this week, Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua put the number of those who had died while trying to cross flooded sections of roads and rivers at 37. The flooding situation has so far left close to 100,000 households displaced, affecting about 500,000 people. Let's now take a look at the day's diary before we get down to the dailies.
Well, and of course, on today's diary, quite a packed one. The Hustler Fund anniversary is today, and so far, they have disbursed 39.5 billion shillings, and beneficiaries are at 21.7 million. The people who have paid so far, the amount is 28.7 billion shillings, and savings of up to 2 billion. And repeat customers are at 7.5 million. Top borrower at 4.5 million, and top saver at 634,000 shillings. And of course, that is what will be happening today from 8 a.m. at Green Park Railways, Nairobi, the 1-year anniversary for Hustler Fund. Away from that, the COP28 starts today, and the conference will be hosted by United Arab Emirates in Dubai, with the official start 30th in November, that is today. And world leaders will attend a segment known as the World Climate Action Summit on 1st and 2nd of December, then leave their high-ranking officials to get with the substance of the negotiations. And of course, matters climate change have been at the forefront of discussions this year, even from the Africa Climate Summit that we just held. And of course, course, matters of climate financing are top of the agenda for this year's COP28. Away from that, in Parliament, quite a busy one this morning, the Departmental Committee on Health will have a meeting with the Cabinet Secretary for Ministry of Health, Susan Nakumicha, and the Principal Secretary, State Department for Public Health and Professional Standards, Mary Mudhoni, to discuss the preparedness by the ministry to mitigate the negative impact of the heavy rains on public health. Elsewhere, Senate Finance and Budget Committee is scheduled to hold a meeting with the Controller of Budget to deliberate on county government budget implementation. Also, the Departmental Committee on Finance and National Planning will hold the following sittings, meeting with the Association of Gaming Operators in Kenya with regards to the Gaming Control Bill 2023. Also, they will meet with the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury and Economic Planning to respond to statements by the Honorable Silvana Sosoro, David Kiplagat, and Honorable Irene Mayaka. And away from that, they will also meet with the National Treasury and Kenya Revenue Authority with regards to the Control Bill 2023. Elsewhere in the Senate Committee on Labor and Social Welfare is set to hold a meeting with petitioners and the Football Kenya Federation on petition concerning mismanagement of football in the country. And also in the Senate still, the Senate Ad Hoc Committee that is pushing for the compensation of the 1998 U.S. Embassy bombing victims will meet with the AG, Justin Muturi, to deliberate on proposed legislation in support of compensation of Kenyan victims. And today in history, on this day, 1947, the United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution calling for the partition of Palestine into two separate states, an Arab and Jewish one that would retain an economic union. And that's what we have on our diary this morning. Of course, we keep on updating you as the hour moves on. Time now to look at the dailies.
Yes, and we go straight to the Standard. Cost of living must drop, Raila to Ruto. That's a big headline on the Standard this morning. This is the coalition's decision during a parliamentary group meeting. Opposition says the dialogue team dropped the ball on the state of the economy, but they will exploit all avenues to see life becoming affordable for Wananchi. The story is on page 4. And Raila Odinga there says, we made reasonable proposals on how to address the rising cost of living, but the government side flatly refused, terming it their exclusive business. We'll be engaging Kenyans further in the coming week, as we must, because the pain of the cost of living is unbearable. That's a big story on the front page of the Standard. The other story given prominence matters COP28. Government in secret carbon deal with Dubai farm. Kenya is said to have agreed to lease millions of acres to Blue Carbon for carbon credit purposes. The arrangement is one of the deals that is to be announced during the COP28 Climate Summit in UAE that begins today. Story extensively covered on pages 2 and 3 of the Standard. Blue Carbon has been ramping up similar contracts across Africa, taking up tens of millions of acres of carbon sinks that it will use to trade to other Gulf countries. Elsewhere, various conservationists have termed this as a new scramble for Africa. Wow. Interesting debate there. And apart from Kenya, whose total acreage under the deal is still unknown, countries that have already signed deals with Blue Carbon include Zimbabwe, where 18 million acres have been given to this company, Liberia, 2.5 million acres, Zambia, 20 million, and Tanzania, 20 million acres. Carbon credits, also known as carbon offsets, are permits that allow polluters to emit certain amount of carbon dioxide or other greenhouse gases. The other highlights on the front page, British Army, you cannot sue us in Kenya. The British Army wants a case where a soldier is being probed over the murder of a Kenyan in Nanyuki, dropped, saying the court has no jurisdiction over them. Elsewhere, MPs asked to probe Turkana power deal. And there's a petition before Parliament asking the legislators to investigate how Lake Turkana wind power mill got paid billions, claiming there could be irregularities. In the real estate, pull out a mortgage financier to restructure. Those are the main stories on the front page. A quick look at the other highlights on the top strip of the Standard. Workers' unions demand housing tax refund. Elsewhere, despair as Palestinians look for food. Treasury now ditches Eurobond. And in sports, Barcelona Atletico through to last 16. That's on page 47. And if we may flip to the back page and take a look at what's the big headline as far as sports is concerned. There's no stopping for Harambee Starlets in their Africa Cup chase. And the second leg will be played next week on Tuesday. Nigeria missed a last-minute penalty as Botswana held Kenya 1-1. This is a result from yesterday's match between Kenya and Botswana. And this is in the qualifiers for 2024 Women's Africa Cup of Nations, also known as WAFCON, to be held in Morocco. And that's the standard.
Let's have a look at the Daily Nation. Headline there, 2CS's sought overcooking oil scam, and KNTC bosses and senior managers of a local bank have been questioned by DCI so far. And 2CS's and a powerful parastatal boss have been sucked into the ongoing investigations into irregular importation of the 16.5 billion shillings worth of edible oils, sugar, rice and maize meant to bring down the prices of the food items locally by a government agency. And that's a story on page 4 and 5 of the Daily Nation this morning. Away from that, what the new health fund will take away from you, and the government is pushing on the plans to deduct 2.75% of gross pay from salaried Kenyans to fund its new health plan, despite a High Court order halting its implementation. Yes, and that's, I think, something that is shown in the Business Daily. Of course, we'll be looking at it in a bit. Matters bipartisan talks there. Opposition leader Raila Odinga now wants a referendum to implement some of the recommendations by the talks team after his coalition endorsed them, followed by a resolution to let President William Ruto to carry the skunk of the high cost of living. And that's the story on page 10 of the Daily Nation this morning. Let's have a look at what we have on the right strip of the Daily Nation. Former roads agency employee forfeits 35 apartments and cash. Other matters there, blow to petitioners as Form 1 selection allowed to proceed. Yes, and no reprieve. Continue collecting housing tax, Wahome now tells employers. And Land CS there, Alice Wahome, directed employers to continue deducting the housing levy from employees' gross salaries and remit it to the Kenya Revenue Authority along with their own contributions. That story there is on page 8 of the Daily Nation. On the top strip of the Daily Nation, 500,000 Kenyans hit by flooding as motorists urged to exercise caution. And that's a story on page 12 of the Daily Nation. Away from that, top hustler fund borrowers to be fitted at today's first anniversary. That story there is on page 16 of the Daily Nation. Let's have a look at what we have on the back page of the Daily Nation. Still that story on the blow to petitioners as Form 1 selection allowed to go on, and Form 1 selection will go on despite complaints from learners and parents after the High Court declined to halt the exercise pending the hearing and determination of 3 cases that have questioned the integrity of the recently released KCPE results. Away from that, Kenya among the 19 African countries Saudi Arabia is using to push fossil fuels. And some matter sports there, good news. A new dawn for Kenyan basketball developments as United States of America's National Basketball Association, NBA, opens office in Nairobi. Yes, and that's the Daily Nation.
Katika gazeti la Taifa Leo, masuala ya gharama ya maisha yameangaziwa hapa. Taifa Leo yasema tulilemewa kulingana na Azimio. Walidai suala la gharama ya maisha ni ajenda ya serikali. Hao ni viongozi wa Azimio. Pale chini yadokeza kuwa vinara wa muungano wa Azimio la Umoja wa Kenya wamejitetea kwamba walijaribu kusukuma ajenda ya kupunguzwa kwa gharama ya maisha kupitia kamati ya kitaifa ya mazungumzo au kipenda NADCO. Lakini serikali kadinda. Hata hivyo, viongozi hao wakiongozwa na Raila Odinga walisema wawakilishi wao waliibuka na mafanikio kadhaa badala ya wenzao wa Kenya Kwanza kukubali baadhi ya mapendekezo yao yatakayowafaidi raia. Habari kamili katika ukurasa wa pili. Aidha asema kuwa viongozi wa Azimio wasema wenzao walipinga mjadala kuhusu gharama ya maisha. Vidokezo vingine upande wa kushoto, serikali yazidi kunyonga mshahara. Wafanyakazi wanaolipwa kwa mwezi kuumia, serikali ikianzisha ushuru zaidi. Pale chini masuala ya ugatuzi, Sakaja Lenku kulipa seneti shilingi milioni 1. Magavana wana hadi leo saa 5 asubuhi kulipa faini ya shilingi milioni 0.5 au wakamatwe. Masuala ya kitaifa pale, mateka zaidi waachiliwa katika Gaza. Wapatanishi wataka makubaliano ya kusitisha vita yadumishwe. Kurasa wa 8 pale juu, masuala ya michezo. Mwamuzi ajitetea kuhusu penalty dhidi ya Newcastle. Mwamuzi aliyechezesha mechi kati ya Paris Saint-Germain PSG na Newcastle United ameshutumiwa vikali baada ya kupeana penalty katika pambano la kundi la F dakika ya 98, mechi ikielekea kumalizika. Kurasa wa 20. Hiyo ndiyo gazeti la Taifa Leo. Tulilemewa Azimio.
All right. Let's take a look at the People Daily, and the big headline of the People Daily, Raila says, "We shall go back to the people." After weeks of negotiations, Azimio differs with the Ruto team over high cost of living, creation of executive posts, claiming they will require referendum, set the stage for fresh battle. That's a big headline on the People Daily. The other story on the front page, Kenyans paid 6 billion shillings irregular power bills to KPLC. On the top strip, Form 1 selection to proceed, court orders. And on the very, very top scroll, or strip rather, tough new rules for private security companies over salaries for guards. That's the stories are given headline prominence on the front page of the People Daily today.
Well, and let's have a look at the Star. Karuano show as Raila Kalonzo endorsed report. And Wamalo attends coalition's top brass meeting, but keeps major forum with MPs. Yes, and that is the story on page 4 to 5 of the Star this morning. Beautiful pictures there as tall order Ruto takes on NBA great Harper at a State House. That was during that ceremony of signing the MOU between NBA as they opened an office in Nairobi. On the top strip of the Star, Waiguru put to task over cash spent on entertainment. And that is the story on page 8 of the Star this morning. Away from that, other stories there on the right strip of the Star, former convict lynched after killing mother. And another story there, senators open inquiry into Bunge Towers. And yes, and on an opinion piece there by Wycliffe Muga, return to parliamentary democracy. These are the stories on the Star this morning.
Kenyans next was saying probably the president might start taxing that height of Ron Harper. But anyway, let's talk money matters. Payslip deductions across 20% as state drops caps on NHIF. That's the big story on Business Daily. And Business Daily also says salaried workers set for deeper take-home pay cuts. Concerns grow about employment law breaches. So they have a whole graph of if you're earning 50,000 cash shillings, the whole monthly salary. So the whole take was about 41,541. Now, 39,736. This is courtesy to employees being subjected to a further 2.75% deduction in salaries. So these particular deductions worsen if you're earning even more. When you compare someone who earns 50,000, the whole deductions about 20-something there.
12,000 there.
Yeah, 12,000. And if you compare someone earning 800,000, that's about a whole 300, about 300,000. Wow. That is what matters taxation. And just below it, matters regulation. Treasury relaxes listing conditions to end IPO drought at NSE. So IPOs, basically initial public offerings. And basically companies seeking to list on the Nairobi Securities Exchange are now required to show proof of having made a profit once in the last 5 years to issue shares under new relaxed rules aimed at ending a 7-year initial public offerings drought at the bourse. Let's take a look at the right strip, that ticker. Kenyans increased car orders by 25% despite soaring prices. The number of cars registered by Kenyans in the first 9 months of the year increased by 25% compared to last year, defying soaring prices. Okay, I feel like we should be, among this 25%.
Tumepanga.
Being Kenyans, among Kenyans, this increased car orders here. Just below that matters economy. Nearly half of state departments burst budgets. And nearly half of state departments surpassed the budgetary allocation for the first quarter of the current financial year by nearly 78 billion shillings, shining a spotlight on the austerity measures announced by the William Ruto administration. And finally, on the very top strip, on the Life Pullout magazine, the pet surgeon on page 19. So I'm curious if your hen is sick. Do you take it to the surgeon, Fred? Considering from where you come from.
Where I come from, hens are not pets. Chicken is food. Anyway, let's cross over to our neighboring countries and see what's headlining there. Let's start off with Uganda. And the big headline on the front page of the Daily Monitor: homes, hotels choke on rising charcoal prices. Wow, makaa on the front page. Presidential order banning charcoal production bites families and food vendors as prices of the cooking fuel rise sharply across the country. This has forced homes to regulate cooking, while vendors have hiked food prices. Extensively covered on 2 pages, 4 and 5 of the Daily Monitor. Matters charcoal. I can't remember the last time I saw anything about any headline to do with charcoal in Kenya. Probably on discussions to do with climate change on the inside pages. The other story on the front page of the Daily Monitor: relief, Nabanja and Ndutu send iron sheets to Karamoja. Matters relief. On the top strip of the Daily Monitor, interesting story here: 70-year-old gives birth to twins. Wow. Uganda can get interesting. And in another highlight, another court clears sale of Muslim property. You can get this daily for about 2,000 Ugandan shillings. It's about 107 Kenyan money. But that's a big headline in Uganda today, in Kampala. Homes, hotels choke on rising charcoal prices.
Na tuangazie gazeti la Mwananchi kule Tanzania. Taarifa kuu pale: mapya Chongolo, na Rais Samia aridhia barua yake ya kuachia ngazi, huku ikielezwa ameagiza mamlaka kuchunguza tuhuma na kuwasilisha ripoti. Anamringi abeba mikoba NSC yateua wagombea mikoa na wilaya. Na taarifa nyingine pale: polisi wawili mbaroni madai ya kuwa mlinzi wa baa kwa bunduki. Vilevile Mkemi aeleza alichobaini kupitia vipimo vya vinasaba. Jamani, Kiswahili ya Tanzania.
You want to go?
Sasa me I go. Vinasaba ni nini sasa? Namna hizo ndizo taarifa kuu katika gazeti la Mwananchi.
Let's take a look at the English version of that. Now the Citizen: why Tanga Cement deal looks done and dusted. The Tanga Cement acquisition process has taken a giant leap forward after 43.5 million shares worth 106.3 billion Tanzanian shillings changed hands in a block trading arrangement at the DSE. More is on page 2. Other stories highlighted, and on the right side there: how to make informed decisions through data, and government pushes for greater women's role in AfCFTA. The government is pushing for women's greater participation in the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which is awaiting the approval of trade ministers to come into effect. At the very top scroll, 800,000 people screened, 30,000 found to have cancer. And in a nutshell, that is the Citizen. And that marks a cue to enter into the caricatures this morning. I just start with the Daily Nation is on page 19. You can definitely take a look at that with us this morning. On page 15, you'll get the caricature for the Standard, page 11 for Business Daily, and page 10, as always, for People Daily. So on page 19 of the Daily Nation, that is the SHIF, and a cow that is being milked dry. And there are 4 buckets there. Well, the other 4 buckets being that have already been milked, and those other 4 buckets are taxes. And there's a gentleman there saying regularize, then keep on milking. And there's a lady there who's now milking this cow dry.
Where matters the new social health insurance fund. On the Standard, the cartoon today on page 14 matters COP28. Climate action cannot wait. Someone riding on top of a tortoise with a turban saying 2015 Paris Agreement. Yes, COP28 kicks off today in the UAE, and matters climate change and climate action will be top of the agenda for the next few days.
I think it speaks largely on since 2015 when we had, I think it's COP21 or something.
Yes,
we had
still on the
road to the Paris Agreement. There was so many promises there, but still they just remain an idea. So I think it's time to turn them into reality. Yeah.
The choice of the ink of the black and red also, I think it speaks volumes. How, I mean, if you eliminate climate action, maybe can wait, and even if you remove the whole black, can be a double speak on the richer countries coming into the summit and even the poor countries.
Okay.
On Business Daily, it's on page 11, matters health there. A gentleman in a hospital, and the doctor telling him the medication will not cure arthritis, but it will send a strong message to you. I think on the screens we do have People Daily.
Okay. On the People Daily, let's see what Sano has here today. There's a caricature of a man here saying it's not an air show, it's the world leaders heading to Dubai for COP28 to discuss climate change and how my car pollutes the air. I think it just shows how...
the exact thing would be...
They say your car pollutes the air, but they're flying to Dubai. They should have used boats. Walk to Dubai.
The irony.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and those are the cartoons on our dailies this morning. After the break, we'll be discussing State of the Nation and the big headlines that concern us, especially on matters to do with that report by the National Dialogue Committee. We'll be having in studio Frederick Okango, Azimio's spokesperson, Dr. Wilfred Mutubwa, legal expert and political commentator, also Dr. John Mutunga, MP Tigania West, and Maliba Arnold, public policy analyst. Do stand by for that conversation, of which you can also be part of. Engage with us through our social media platforms on X at TV47 News and on Facebook, TV47 Kenya. You're watching Morning Cafe. GOtv 47 with me, Fred Indemuli. We now want to take a look at the headlines today. And the big headline on the Standard, cost of living must drop, Raila to Ruto. On the front page of the Daily Nation, 2 CSs sought over cooking oil scam. In studio this morning, we do have Frederick Okango, Azimio spokesperson. Karibu sana.
Good morning and thank you.
Next to Bwana Okango, we have Dr. Wilfred Mutubwa, legal expert and political commentator.
Good morning, Fred.
Good morning. And Dr. John Mutunga, MP Tigania West, also joining the panel this morning. Karibu sana.
Good morning. Thank you very much.
We're hoping one more person will be joining the panel. We'll introduce them as we go along. Now, of course, today I would want us to focus on the National Dialogue Committee report and the Azimio response that came yesterday following that parliamentary group meeting. But before we get to that, and there's something that is missing from the front pages today but has been a big talking point this whole week, and it is a government plan to privatize state corporations, KICC, Kenya Pipeline, and about 9 others. Let's start from there, because this has generated quite some discussion, especially online. And many Kenyans are wondering why, especially the KICC is being sold. Bwana Mutunga, some of these assets have sentimental value. The KICC is iconic, and it is probably one of those landmarks that identifies this capital city. Don't you think that probably, yes, there could be justification in privatizing the same, but has the government communicated this sentiment enough to lower the levels of skepticism, especially in the sale of KICC?
I want to agree with you that the government has not communicated enough, because it just appeared in the media. I think KICC, in my very considered opinion, has sentimental value. It is heritage, the Kenyan heritage. It identifies a lot with our heritage, let me say. It's one of the institutions that we value a lot as Kenyans. And I think there needs to be serious conversations on this before we get privatized. Of course, government is very poor in doing business. And of course, you see the struggle that has been in making KICC specifically profitable. Sometimes you have it is brought under the management of, it is made at parastatal, and then initially it was under the local authorities and so on. There has been so much of, moving to and fro. But I think before you privatize, as I may cite an example of what happened in Western Kenya, the sugar belt, there are several government companies, milling companies that needed to be privatized. And we had to do serious public participation. People needed to distill over these issues. There are issues of sentimental value, like the land belongs to the community must benefit, private practitioner probably might not consider some of these issues when they are hiring people, or if they just target profit or take profit as the only prime, consideration, then the cultural and the heritage issues, get lost. So I want to agree with you that I think there needs to be serious conversation on KICC specifically. The others are, I think, it is the decision of the government to privatize. I would consider having profitable institutions other than having to, spend exchequer resources on institutions that can otherwise be put in private hands and make profits.
Okay.
And there are good reasons why they don't make profits. Of course, some of them are blown in terms of employment. We have too many people employed. The recurrent expenditure is extremely high. So the rational choice is made in terms of how to manage the institution does not augur very well with the economic provisions.
Okay. Bwana Mutuba, you hear what Bwana Mutunga is saying. He is a member of the National Assembly. Now, the biggest concern is that the Privatization Act sidestepped now sidesteps the National Assembly in this process. Hence, part of the concern that the process of privatization has just been left to Treasury and the Executive, and Parliament has only been reduced to receiving a report to ratify at the very end. Even the public participation that the government has invited Kenyans to take part in, the involvement of Parliament is not there. Do you feel that probably this process is not going the way it should have been?
Thank you very much, Fred. Thank you, first of all, for having me here today. The debate around privatization is not new. And one of the problematic things we have in this country is to discuss matters like these with emotion and sentiment. I have had the discussion around KICC for the past few days. Very little is said about the merit of the privatization itself. No one is going down to break the numbers, give you empirical evidence. Why? Or give you even alternatives. There is a lot of sentiment. People just want to speak about their emotional attachment. But the truth of the matter is that whether public or private, iconic or not, KICC will remain where it is. The land is going nowhere, the building is going nowhere. It is the ownership and the control and the manner in which it is going to be run. Dr. Mutunga has told you there are many things that ail state corporations, including this element of sentiment has also let us down, because the corporation has not been run well, it is run down. These are some of the things that are bleeding government, because you have a parastatal which makes no money but consumes money from other sectors. So you collect taxes to run KICC. You collect taxes to run KICC so that people can see sentiment, take pictures, and feel good that we have KICC. It is not really viable. The question is, what is the commercial viability of KICC? What is the basis for continuing to run KICC as it is? Privatization is one of the ways that government can manage some of these assets, sometimes give up some shareholding in the company or in the entity, or sell it off completely so as to collect money to do other things. If KICC is privatized tomorrow, Fred, there will be KICC the day after.
The question is,
yes,
because some of the concerns that I've seen is that if at all you sell a huge or controlling stake in KICC, that the new owner could be at liberty to change a few things, and structure or land, which probably would affect the skyline of Nairobi, and that is a concern.
Remember also that government is the regulator of development. Government can give you a lease, government can give you a concession that is conditional. These are legal matters. If you have a proper preposition that would protect a heritage, even your private home, if it is found to be a UNESCO site for heritage, you will still own it, but under certain conditions. What people do not understand is that this can be ring-fenced. The privatization can be given on conditions, and the conditions will be regulated by the state. I personally do not feel that we have to make decisions with our hearts. Let's make our decisions with our heads, because where we are today as a country, we are in a deep state of malaise, particularly economic trouble, because we make our decisions with our hearts. What happens is that we do not care about the bloated workforce, we do not care about the maintenance of assets, but because we are so drawn to sentiment, particularly emotional sentiment, and not legal or commercial sense, as Mheshimiwa has said, let's have a rational discussion about this matter.
Okay.
And when we have a rational discussion, we will make a rational decision. Is it viable to continue running some of these state corporations the way we have done?
Okay, but it's not always about business, Bwana Okango. Yes, we know that privatization of some institutions could end up becoming profitable. Like Safaricom was seen that even in privatization, it has actually excelled in comparison to its mother company, Telkom. And definitely there's some dividend to be gained from that kind of privatization. But running a nation is not only about business and commercial interests, is it?
Absolutely, I agree. And first of all, let me say that Kenyans must think with their head and their heart. Kenyans must continue being emotional. Kenyans are doing that because of the nature of service they have been enjoying or they have been receiving from successive governments. And therefore, that trust deficit has made Kenyans to believe that certain things are done in this country for the benefit of specific individuals. And Kenyans must question. And therefore, there's nothing wrong with Kenyans being emotional about KICC being sold. When we were growing up, we believed that when you go to Nairobi, the first point that you must appear at is KICC and take a photo. And that has been historical. I mean, other than the sentimental values that that iconic building brings to the country, it doesn't matter that the building will remain there. The question also could be, who is the owner of the land that that iconic building sits on? Mm-hmm. These are questions that will come because people will go to court and start saying, no, you don't own this land, it is our land. Number two, look at the state corporations like KPC. How do you privatize Kenya Pipeline Corporation? How do you privatize National Oil Corporation? How? You are trying to tell the people of Kenya that, by the way, the cost of fuel will now continue going up because when you privatize such entities, then it will be very difficult to manage the cost of fuel because they'll be in the hands of private individuals. Mm-hmm. Number two, we have said that the people's involvement in such transactions is important. What is the view of the public on the privatization? What is the view of the public? Does the contribution of the public enough to guarantee the sale to other entities? Number two, what is the view of Parliament, mm-hmm. the involvement of Parliament? Because remember, Cabinet passed a resolution that bypassed Parliament, and they gave the powers to the CS Treasury to do such transactions. Parliament is not involved. The people that Parliament represents, or people like Honorable Mutungi, are not involved. Then what are you trying to say? Public participation is a national value. They've been invited for public participation. They have been invited, but listen, at the very tail end. Mm-hmm. From the start, Cabinet had made a decision that they will bypass, and they gave that decision to the CS Treasury. So they've been invited at the tail end, but that is not even the issue. The issue here is, who is behind the buying of these parastatals? Is it an internal business within government that some people, powerful people in government, are buying them through proxies? Is it an issue of loss making? Has it been put in the public as the government communicated that KPC is making such amount of losses, to maintain it will be difficult, and therefore when we privatize or when we do concession, this is what we are going to benefit from it. And this money that we get from it, we are going to use it to address 1, 2, 3, particularly now that we are talking about cost of living. How are we going to address that? That communication is not forthcoming. And therefore, for us in Azimio, we fault government. Lack of communication, lack of involvement, both Parliament adequately and the people. And therefore, it will be disastrous to sell some of those government entities, particularly at a time when people don't really know who owns the building, who owns the land, what is the government shareholding in some of them, and for what purpose are they being sold. Plus the true value of some of these assets. Exactly. I saw in social media people valuing, I don't know, KICC at 6 billion, some 142 billion. I mean, yes. The reason why this is coming out is because the government of the day is a joke. But Mutunga, and that's where the question comes in about the role of Parliament. It should be one of the main roles of Parliament to oversight some of these transactions, oversight the executive. When Parliament abrogated its role because, yes, Parliament passed that privatization act, it went through Parliament. By that, you ceded ground to the executive. Don't you think that that, on the part of Parliament, was a weakness?
I don't think passing the law was a weakness. The idea was that we gave provisions for, the general guidelines on what needs to be done. The Privatization Act is very clear on the procedure to be followed. Even if the Parliament is involved at the decision stage, like for instance, as I talked about 5 sugar companies in western part of Kenya, Parliament was involved. We hand the CS Treasury writing a memo to Parliament, and this memo was discussed, and it was then moved on to two committees, the Committee on Finance and Committee on Agriculture and Livestock, which now went further to engage the people to get to know exactly the issues and also think through this particular process of privatization, and then give proposals to Parliament on which is the best way to go forward. And I believe that is the way that was handled. So the act is clear. The executive can use the act to basically propose privatization. And when it comes to this particular decision, what I said is that it would have been probably better to bring it to Parliament, and then we discuss it, and then we engage the public at that particular level, and then come up with a decision that is people-driven.
Do you therefore agree that sometimes Parliament cedes ground without even thinking much about it? On this particular matter?
Parliament has not ceded any ground. What there is that at the end of the day, the matter will come to Parliament. At the end of the day before.
From a legal perspective, do you see a loophole
there? It is really the chicken or the egg. The idea is that we'll go round and round, and then at the end of the day, decisions will be made in Parliament because release of assets is part of the parliamentary duties.
Yes. I think, Fred, that we are missing the point here. We have a law, we have a constitution. The Privatization Act is extremely elaborate in the steps that have to be taken before the government gives up or sells an asset. Now, the worry people have on the street is based on headlines. You can see my colleague is talking about valuations on social media. There is a very clear process for valuation. There is even a very clear process for bidding for these properties, valuation, and getting value for money. And there are processes for appeal, including, in fact, a tribunal and a court process in the event any Kenyan is unhappy with it. So let's not jump the gun. We have enough security, we have enough buffer zones, we have enough, processes to protect, including parliamentary protection. And remember, members of the public will be invited to give their views, and the views will be given on the assets and the disposal. Every Kenyan, including yourself, every private person will have an opportunity. When we start speculating about who is behind it, this government, we are suspicious. The problem is that when we operate from the basis of speculation, and we are just saying, look, there could be something here because we don't trust government, there must be something happening behind the scenes, we lose the point. Is privatization as a process a good thing or bad thing? Has it been done elsewhere? Is it part of our laws? Is it something that can happen? And does it
questioning the process, not the intention to privatize?
And the problem is this: the process itself is properly provided for in statute in the Constitution, including tribunals to deal with any objections. Why don't these people who have these objections bring merited complaints to the table, perhaps take them to the tribunal, bring them to the public participation arena, and raise their voices? It is not just enough to say, for many years we have been coming to Nairobi and we want to see KICC standing. We want to know who the owner is. If you want to know who the owner of KICC is, you go to the Ministry of Lands and conduct a search. Okay. It will tell you who the owner of the land is. Don't go into the newspapers and ask, well, who owns KICC?
What Mutuba is saying is finding it very difficult to defend this government. Mutuba should know that what he's saying, everything we do is either in statute or in the Constitution or in any law. We know that. But the question we have raised, and he knows that, for you to do public participation, the views of the public must be factored in the final decision making. Is that the case in this country? It is not. So Mutubo cannot come on this show and tell us that everything must follow the law, and if you want to know the value, go to national lands. He knows what happens at the national lands. He's a lawyer. He knows what happens there. He knows the rot there. And this government has necessitated such rots. So we cannot come here and tell Kenyans that go and do valuation of the land, then come and know the of the land. No. What Kenyans are raising, they're raising fundamental issues. They're asking questions that demand for answer. The government of the day has refused to answer those questions, not because they can't deliberately, because there's a sinister motive behind the sale. And he knows that. He cannot defend this government. Everyone who has tried to defend it has failed. He's not going to be the one to succeed, because we know for sure that there is a sinister motive. If there was not, then they would have come out strongly from the day one and say these are the number of losses that these parastatals have made. This is the reason why we are privatizing, and this is the gain we are going to make. And that communication should have come. Honorable Mutunga is a member of parliament. His first statement said that they have failed the government to communicate effectively on the reason for privatization. So I am sorry to say he's becoming now government spokesperson, but he's doing a bad job. Okay. Pathetic.
Well, we'll come back and get to other discussions. But for now, let's take a break. You're watching Morning Cafe on TV47. And the conversations during the break are even hotter. And we're still in studio with Frederick Okango, Azimio spokesperson, Dr. Mutubwa, lawyer and also political commentator, and Dr. Mutunga, MP, Tigania West. We now want to take a look at Azimio's response to the National Dialogue Committee report. And yesterday, Azimio leader Raila Odinga chaired a parliamentary group meeting to get feedback on the general consensus about that dialogue report, National Dialogue Committee report that was made public at the weekend. A number of issues did come up, and it's good that Fred Okango is here with us to share some of these sentiments. And many Kenyans are confused. So is it a go? Is it a no? Because we know that within Azimio itself, there has been a split in what exactly the response should be. So what is the official Azimio response to the committee report?
Thank you, Fred. First of all, there's no split in Azimio coalition. There's no split in Azimio One Kenya coalition party headed by Raila Amolo Odinga. Everyone is on concurrence on this issue. Number two, if you remember, the mandate of the NADCO was to facilitate dialogue and consensus building, then recommend constitutional, legal, or policy reforms on the issues of concern to the people. Number two, in doing this, there was what is called a framework agreement that was signed by both parties. In that framework agreement, some of the sections say that, I think one or two said that in the final report, there shall be agreed issues and issues that are not agreed upon. And this report did exactly that in presenting issues that were agreed upon and issues that were not agreed upon. But the most important thing is, what were the issues that were formulated by Azimio's side for discussion? On 3rd of August, if you recall, Azimio One Kenya Coalition Party presented to the public the issues of concern that they thought should be discussed at NADCO. Number one on top of the list was cost of living. Of course, and related matters in Article 43. Then came the electoral justice, restructuring and reconstitution of IBC, fidelity to political parties, and outstanding constitutional issues. That was clear. On the other side, Kenya Kwanza presented their issues as two-thirds gender, creation of leader of opposition office, prime cabinet secretary, and I think there was also restructuring and reconstitution of IBC. However, in the framework agreement, we also agreed that each party shall respect the issues presented for discussion by the other. And that was done. When these were harmonized and finally prioritized, starting with the electoral justice, that is how we went to the discussion. But we have to say, as the coalition, we have accepted and approved the NADCO report with a proviso. And we have said, because the framework agreement allowed the parties to list what is not agreed upon, it is unfortunate that one of our very important issues of concern to the people that led the people to go to the street, the cost of living, was not addressed jointly. However, if you read the report of 296 pages and over 820 paragraphs, you can see the cogent propositions that have been put by Azimio Coalition Party on how to address the cost of living. We have said in that report that our recommendation as a coalition is, number one, administrative, to look into the issues of corruption. This regime of the day, there has been allegations of over 5 mega scandals. Some of them are still making headlines today. We have seen that if we are to go administratively and look at those issues of corruption, then we can save billions. We have said we look at legislative recommendations, particularly on the Appropriation Bill 2023 and Finance Act 2023, where certain section ought to have been repealed to save funds again for the cost of living. Then we have said on policy issues, we have to look at what is the government policy on particularly travel, domestic and international, that also can save money, and also allocation on some of these state departments like correctional services, where we have seen the number of prisoners in Kenya, over 66,000. Why don't we look at the power of mercy and reduce the number of prisoners so that we can also save money, over 18 billion? What I'm saying, Fred, is that Azimio la Umoja and Kenya Coalition has said, this report is not perfect. It is unfinished. And therefore, because we believe in the strength of the people, because we believe in lowering the cost of living, we shall take another step as the second phase of the struggle to ensure that we address the cost of living. But for now, whatever the agreement that has been put in the report, that shall fly.
Okay, on this issue of the next step that Azimio will take,
yes.
Raila Odinga talked about engaging the people further in the coming week.
Of course.
Is there any indication of what kind of route this will take? Because the understanding is that, and there are people within Azimio who have previously indicated that the possibility of returning to the streets through maandamano.
Fred, let me tell you, the fact that we went to dialogue with our friends from Kenya Kwanza and also invited the public to give their views. By the way, the public gave very, very important issues that can be, very important solutions that can address the cost of living. But when you talk about engaging the public, it doesn't mean maandamano only. It also means that we can go and have town halls and address the public and tell them, for us to address this cost of living, this is what we need to do. We can go for rallies. We can do stakeholder engagements. There are so many ways of engaging the public. But I know this regime fears Azimio from, when Azimio exercises their political rights as stipulated in the Constitution. That does not stop us from doing that. What we are saying is, at the right time, and in the coming days, we shall be communicating to the public on what is the next step in this struggle as we take the next phase in addressing the cost of living? Because you and I know today the cost of living is higher, even more than when we started the discussion. It is higher, and it's going to go higher. We are being told of a decision by court that is unconstitutional. The court declared some of these levies unconstitutional, and the government of the day goes ahead and tells the public that it is mandatory now, you must pay that in full, even before the ink dries. So we are asking ourselves, are we trying to even be sensitive to the plight of the people that are suffering to lower this cost of living, or we are being combative, heartless, reckless in implementing unconstitutional laws that are very impunitive to the people of Kenya? So what we are saying for us, the report has come out. There was an agreement. Yes, there are issues of concern to the other party that they have addressed. Some of those issues were not our issues, but because we respected them and we discussed and agreed, our main issues that made people go to the street was one of them, the cost of living. We strongly believe, Fred, that the cost of living to be addressed, we need everyone. But Kenya Kwanza from the start have never been interested in addressing the cost of living. They say they're the government. They say they have the plan. The plan has collapsed. We have decided now we'll go back to the people and engage them.
Okay. Dr. Mutunga, now the battle goes back to Parliament. This report, because there are areas of agreement, will go to Parliament. But there's a new battlefront between probably the political sides, and that's the issue of referendum. Now, Azimio insists that, especially on the issue of entrenching or establishing the office of the official leader of opposition and entrenching the office of the prime cabinet secretary, that those are issues that have to be taken back to the people through a referendum. Kenya Kwanza has been reluctant to talk about referendum, and even the president, who presented these proposals, because these are proposals from the president directly, he presented them through a memorandum to the Houses of Parliament. The thinking is that they would be processed through a parliamentary process, and they become law. But now there appears to be an argument that no, that cannot happen. What's next?
Now, first of all, according to what Mr. Okango is saying, that the Azimio considers going back to the people. The reason why NADCO was set up is to basically migrate from them versus us, because they spoke very strongly that they have ideas they would like to share on cost of living. They had ideas they wanted to share on the constitutional, the changes that require to be done on the issues that they put on the table. So they were given an opportunity. So Kenya spoke, in our opinion. Azimio and the Kenya Kwanza sat down and considered these things. The idea was to resolve as much as possible, all of them, because going to the streets, if I may understand what Azimio means by going back to the people, it means going to the streets. It's really not engaging the people. This process was a structured mechanism of engaging the people. But the Azimio understanding of engaging the people is calling the people to the streets. It is costly, it is destructive, it is going to be disruptive. It has been disruptive, as we know. So that is one direction that the government would not like to go. And that is why probably the government would rather we manage these issues as Kenyans, bearing in mind that cost of living will not be brought down by making use statement and by wearing sufurias on your hand on the streets. That will not really reduce the cost of living. The cost of living will be reduced by the systematic redressing of the concerns that basically increase on the cost of food, increase on the cost of travel, cost of many other things. The government is doing a lot to do that, to get there. Already, the cost of food is coming down because of interventions aimed at bringing down the cost of production of food. The cost of education has come down because the government has put in a lot of resources to ensure that those who are completely unable or considerably unable are significantly supported, and so on and so forth. So your question is, does the Kenya Kwanza consider referendum an option? Referendum is one of the options. But bearing in mind the situation, the state at which we are right now, we need to be realistic. A referendum is not something that will cost us 5,000 shillings. A referendum is an extremely expensive process. It is emotionally expensive, it is politically expensive, it is economically expensive, and we are at a situation right now where we should be bearing about the cost. If we have to reduce the cost, why open the Pandora's box of bringing in more, possibilities to increase the cost?
So Kenya Kwanza will not be considering the option of a referendum?
We are going to consult as Kenya Kwanza. We are going to have a PG where we shall clearly consult and see the direction to take. My considered opinion is that the government would rather tread very carefully at this particular point in time, because times are difficult. Times are not easy. It's not the way we want to say it. It's not the statements we want to release that really will matter. What matters is what we are doing, the small, big things we are doing to bring down the cost of living, to make sure that life is comfortable in Kenya, to make sure development goes on uninterrupted, and to make sure the country grows like the other countries.
Dr. Mutuba, the Constitution is clear about its provisions for a proposed amendment to the Constitution and the possibility of a referendum on some instances. Do you feel that the Azimio argument that some of these proposals will necessitate a referendum, do you agree with that assertion?
First of all, let me begin by saying this, and I've listened to my two friends here, and I want to say that first, this was a great moment of pride for Kenyans, because we, instead of taking our issues to the streets, we came together to discuss. This is what happened and birthed the new constitution. This is what happened before and has seen us come this far, particularly in terms of legislative reform. The beginning point is to say that the discussion, I don't want to agree with my friend Okango, the discussion was not between Azimio and Kenya Kwanza. I personally went before the NADCO, I made presentations, many Kenyans from all walks of life went there. It was a national discussion, it was a dialogue between Kenyans about their issues. So when we make it Azimio versus Kenya Kwanza, we lose the point. And it is politicized for no reason. Because we were coming together to discuss pertinent issues that affect Kenyans. Remember, the Constitution says that we can deal with our issues through our representatives in Parliament or directly. So we were exercising direct sovereignty. But even more importantly, the Azimio One Kenya coalition, as it's called, was represented by none other than a very eminent former vice president, a key principal. He appended his signature to the report, meaning that he took authenticity, took responsibility for the matters there. Now, I agree with the Honorable Raila Odinga, and I have listened to his statement yesterday, and I agree with him. The document is imperfect. No human endeavor can produce a perfect document. Even if we go to the parliament today or anywhere else, even if you gave Azimio and Okanga the opportunity to write the report, it will not be perfect. What do we need to do? To say we have a blueprint from which we can build. There is something we can begin discussing. When you look at that document, 300 pages, all the recommendations put, a beautifully drawn document in terms of acknowledging every person's views and what was practically possible in the areas where we could. To answer your question now, where do we move from here in terms of referendum, statute, policy? How do we move forward? There are some of those low-lying fruits, some things that can be done without legislative or constitutional amendment. There are certain things that can be done through constitutional amendments through Parliament. And others, of course, may require constitutional amendments through referendum. I want to agree with Mutunga. We have just come from an election. It is 1 year into the new term. For the opposition, it is an opportunity to test the popularity of this government and its functions. For the government, it is an opportunity to say, look, we do not want to go into a plebiscite at this particular moment. Already, Azimio is saying there is a cost of living problem, that they are saying they want to go to referendum. Can you see the contradiction in sorts? You cannot be saying that we have a problem with money, we have a debt problem, we have a problem in even sustaining certain people's livelihoods, but we want a referendum because we want to play politics with this issue. I think as the sobriety that took us to the dialogue should prevail, let's ask ourselves, What can we do right now? When you look at that document, unlike what my colleague says here, I have looked at it. There are viable proposals on reducing the cost of living. You see, the previous administration, which was somehow involved or related to the leader of opposition, had this approach of subsidizing consumption. So we had fuel subsidized, we had subsidies all over the place. The Kenya Kwanza approach is to subsidize production. Let's give that an opportunity and see. Let's criticize, because our job as Kenyans, as the opposition in Azimio, is to criticize and give options.
Okay.
Indeed, I want to agree that proposals were put on the table. Not all proposals were found to be viable. But where we are today in terms of the process going forward is to say, we have a document here. Where do we start?
So you're saying, basically you're saying a referendum, yes, but not now.
A referendum may be necessary for some of the amendments.
But after a while.
But we must agree, we must ask ourselves as Kenyans, are we prepared for a referendum 1 year after the general election?
Okay.
That is the question.
Fred, let me make it clear. I did not say that the discussions were only between Kenya Kwanza and Azimio. I started by giving the mandate of the NADCO, and I said they were to facilitate dialogue, consensus building, and address those issues that would require, constitutional, legal, and policy, of course, that concern the people of Kenya. And therefore, these are about the people of Kenya. This report has outlined participation and submissions from the public and stakeholders and experts. Then it has given the observation on each issue by the committee. Then it has given recommendation. I have read the report more than once. I was part of the team, so I know what I'm saying. In this report, it's only Azimio that had interim issues, and one of the interim issues was cost of living. In the interim, how do we address it? So from the start, we have been trying to address this cost of living. Kenya Kwanza were even reluctant. They said they are the government of the day. They have a plan. They started from there. Number two, the report comes with some instruments called legislative instruments. And this addresses the amendments in the statutes. Election Act, Election Offences Act, Opposition Leader Bill, the statute instruments, all those are there. Now, we are not saying, and this is what Raila Odinga said, that because the report is unfinished, the report is imperfect, but we agree that we have made strides. And he said this is a beginning of a good step that we have made. So it means that whatever that is good in this report, they can start implementing immediately. And that's why the framework agreement said the final report shall be taken to Parliament for adoption and implementation because of some of those instruments. Number two, I can tell you, Fred, in that report, particularly on the issues that will require referendum, that touches on 255, and you know these are not. Those issues, we have said, Kenya Kwanza cannot evade a referendum. They will never do that because that was the law. And we said even in our statement yesterday, because we know there are people who would easily rush to court if those were to be done clandestine. We would want to follow the normal procedure and the constitutional procedure. These talks were guided by the provisions of law and the constitution, and therefore we must also complete them as such. We are saying that for you to create some of these offices, the provisions in 255 require that they have to go to the people because they touch on functions of parliament, their Bill of Rights therein. Then there are also issues to do with independent commissions, like we are creating now a commission called Independent Political Party Regulatory Commission. Therefore, it must go to the people. there is no provision in law that says that this is the time you can do referendum, this is the time you cannot do referendum. We understand that the country might be experiencing economic challenges, but we also know that to address some of those challenges, the people must participate in making laws, and this now amending the constitution, so that they can have comfort. So
was there ever discussion about timelines in as far as implementation of this report is concerned?
There are so many timelines. For anyone who has read the report, for example, in one of the auditing the the 2022 electoral processes, it says that within 21 days of adoption of the report, there shall be a panel established to look into the audit there. Then within 90 days, the other timeline. There's so many timelines in that report, and that's why the report comes ready with instruments. And by the way, Fred, most of those consensus that were made have been ring-fenced. You cannot change them. You cannot change them.
It's on this issue of some of the proposals that will necessitate a referendum. Is there a timeline on, provided within the report?
If you read the reports, particularly the paragraph where Azimio gives recommendation, remember the report also suggests and says that Kenya Kwanza were uncomfortable with the referendum. But we have said as Azimio in the report, and we said that at an agreed time, that is the wording in the report. Yes, at an agreed time, this office shall be established via a referendum pursuant to provisions of 255. It is there in the report.
Some of these provisions or proposals that will require referendum, as I said earlier, were direct proposals by the president. It means the president has personal interest in the establishment or entrenchment of the office of Prime Cabinet Secretary, and probably an interest in also the establishment of the office of Official Leader of Opposition. Do you think that the president would be interested in ensuring that this is implemented within his first term before 2027?
I have listened to the president several times speak about the reasons why it is necessary. He believes it is necessary to have especially the office of the Leader of Opposition. And some of the reasons include we need strong opposition. Opposition that is organized, opposition that is systematic, and the opposition that is taking the government to task on issues. Not opposition that will come today and tell people, let's move to the street, let's destroy this, let's do the other. No. We need opposition that looks at key concerns affecting Kenyans and bring them out. And if there are serious concerns, then government is obligated to deal with those issues. But if it's just noise and populist, pronouncements and demonstrations, then the government will have to apply the law. So it became necessary, and of course this is an issue that probably we may have omitted during the constitution making, that a presidential candidate who loses becomes nothing in this country. You just become a head of others, the opposition, when you don't have a substantive office. There is no substantive office for the head of opposition. And then you have to appoint people who are already elected who want to represent you in parliament. And the thinking, if I may interpret it, is that we could probably even have this office represented. We could have the Leader of Opposition, coming to parliament and bringing the issues or operating from a point of reference where we know that all issues about opposition are harmonized. They are thought through, they are channeled through the laid down mechanisms. That is basically the thinking. Mm-hmm. Now, when it comes to the office of the Prime Cabinet Secretary, the report basically talks about the Prime Minister. That is the position that was agreed upon, so it was a trade-off. It doesn't have to be the Prime Cabinet Secretary. We create the position of Prime Minister. And it is necessary. It has been found to be necessary because Kenyans would like to have some sharing of the centers of the power.
Okay. Namutubwa,
yes, please.
Azimio also says here at the very last bit of their statement that as Kenyans we need to agree whether we want a parliamentary, presidential, or hybrid system. meaning we're considering changing the structure of government. This will definitely need a referendum, will require a referendum. The issue is the National Dialogue Committee was formed to respond to current problems that are facing this country now. If we say that it is too soon to hold a referendum, meaning we postpone it to a later time, that will be appropriate or convenient for both Azimio and Kenya Kwanza, we will be defeating the purpose of this National Dialogue Committee, don't you think?
I think let me begin by saying this. 13 years after the constitution that we have now was promulgated, it is time to do an introspection about the governance system we have given ourselves. And I want to agree with Mheshimiwa here. We are a highly ethnic community of people in this country. And we have now had experience that when we have had the cake or the semblance of participation in governments at the top level being spread, we have done better. And therefore, perhaps the problems we have today with governance is that the opposition is operating somehow in some obscure space. And therefore, the president's proposal, and remember, the president is a Kenyan, and he also comes with a constituency of people who elected him. So his views reflect the views of people who elected him, who gave him the mandate. Now, the question whether we are now to look at the structure of government as something that is a long-term question rather than a short-term. This dialogue, in my view, did not restrict our discussion to matters which are only for today. And perhaps our problems today could actually be entrenched in the manner in which we have governed ourselves for the last 13 years. And the question that is put by Azimio, and sometimes I get surprised when elected leaders come to the people and give proposals when they have platforms to do some of these things. One of the things I expected the Azimio coalition to do with its numbers in the House is to move some of these amendments they want to see happening. Some of these proposals on cost of living that they say will be policy or legislative, where are they in the House? Members of Parliament have a privilege you and I, Fred, don't have. That is creating law, making a private member's bill, taking it to Parliament, going to the committees and raising some of these issues. When they come and complain to us on the streets, then we ask ourselves, exactly why did we send these people to the House? Why don't they use the privilege of sitting in Parliament to make some of these laws? I mean, look, instead of just telling us we need a referendum now, these are leaders who are supposed to be conscious about our situation today. They should ask ourselves, what do we do with the current situation, with the cost of living, with the difficulties we have with unemployment and many other problems that we face today, including our debt situation? Mm-hmm. Instead of saying that, look, because you want to create the office of the leader of opposition, we do not want people to go to court, this is our proposal. That is what I expected to see coming. And the dialogue presented an opportunity for viable options to be put on the table. The president, some of us, many Kenyans came with their proposals. Azimio has also their own proposals. If they find that their proposals are not working in the dialogue approach, they still have options. Remember, these are people in positions of privilege, including members of Parliament. The Azimio coalition itself has members of Parliament in excess of 100 plus in both houses, and they are able to make very cogent proposals in the House. When I look at the structure of government, whether it is parliamentary or presidential, that is a fundamental shift from our constitutional system of governance, particularly in the executive. It will require a plebiscite. Kenyans have to say something about it. The question is, does that resolve our current situation? Remember, Azimio went to the street because they were saying the cost of living has skyrocketed. We think the government has all these problems coming through. We need a dialogue. Otherwise, we are going to protest. So the question is, if you change from parliamentary to presidential, do you deal with the question of cost of living? Do you deal with the question of unemployment, for instance?
Do you deal with the question of inclusivity? And the question is about the urgency of implementing some of this.
Fred, let me put something straight again, because Kenyans have a right to know the truth. It is not Azimio who called for the dialogue. On 4th on 2nd of April, William Ruto came and told the public that he has listened to what Azimio is saying and therefore is open for dialogue. It's on that basis that the first bipartisan talk was established and it failed. But then, upon realizing that these issues were escalating, the two gentlemen agreed again, let's try it again, and it worked. Number two, Azimio has proposed cogent solutions that would address the cost of living. And I have said that administrative, legislative, policy. Those issues are in some of the statutes that have been prepared, legislative instruments. They will go to Parliament, and therefore they will be addressed. But the issue is, why is it that in those proposals, Kenya Kwanza is uncomfortable with some, even though the court has said some of those issues are unconstitutional? Number two, we know for sure that the issue of state offices, Azimio was done with them in the BBI. What William Ruto did, he lifted the issues that were in BBI, put them on a paper in form of a memorandum, and sent them to the two speakers, Office of the Leader Official Position, Prime Minister, which they call Prime Cabinet Secretary, which is now a mongrel, state funds, Constituent Development Fund, State Oversight Fund, and even now, the public added them the ward fund, and which has been approved by the NADCO. And therefore, those issues were Kenya Kwanza issues. We were done with them in the BBI that they really fought. But Kenyans have said, if you look at the submission on the state office, in fact, all the stakeholders that appeared, all of them proposed that let's have a constructive, structured opposition. Read the report, it is there. However, we have said, because we respect the issues from Kenya Kwanza, this is an issue that has come. And that's why we said in our recommendation as Azimio that at an agreed time, we didn't say we want it now. I've seen the media reporting Raila wants a referendum now. No, that's what Raila wants. Raila has said, and he has been advised, that some of those offices and commissions, to establish them, you have to go to the people. That is what Raila Odinga is saying.
Even if it comes later, probably 2029.
An agreed time, that is the text. And again, before Maliba comes in, we have said that Kenya Kwanza have given their reasons why they don't want the referendum, even though they want the offices. It is them pushing for the offices, not us. We have told them, if you want the offices, fair enough, we must follow the Constitution. 255 is clear. Let's go that route. We are waiting for their PG. Let their leader tell us that they are ready for that referendum. Okay. What will they tell the people that their leader, when their leader says that they are ready for referendum? We'll have to go for the referendum.
Allow me to introduce Arnold Maliba joining the panel now, public policy analyst. Karibu sana. We've been discussing Azimio's response to the National Dialogue Committee report that was made public at the weekend, and that issue of possibility of a referendum came up because Raila Odinga said some of those proposals will have to go back to the people. And you're looking at the urgency of such an exercise. Is it necessary? Is it possible that even President William Ruto would be willing to have a referendum within his first time in office?
Well, first of all, it's important to point out that the NADCO report is quite progressive and very practical. In the past, we've done reports like BBI that were quite lofty, but difficult to implement and very expensive. We already are struggling as a country because we gave ourselves a constitution that was very expensive to implement. Partly, some of the problems of where we are, besides fiscal mismanagement, is because of the kind of constitution we gave ourselves. It was quite difficult. So you have to actually give it to the NADCO team for really trying to come up with a really practical, a near practical report. So on that particular end, they really tried. It doesn't really look flowery and everything else, but it's quite practical. Secondly, you realize that the report in and of itself is, in my opinion, different from BBI because number one, it has not divided the country. If you remember, once the BBI 1 and 2 were released, the country was divided right in the middle, quite polarizing. There are a little bit of issues here, but there's no agency, there's no venom, there's no passion that causes problems. Two, the report was very cheap. The BBI process was expensive, very expensive. This has been done on a shoestring. I think the farthest they went was Elementaita, and they spent a lot of time in Bomas, and then probably Stony Athi. Not what we saw last time, a very expensive process. But that as it is, I think some of those processes that, some of the proposals therein really lead us to Article 255. But I do not think that this is the time. It's neither wise, safe, or even sensitive to talk about a referendum at this particular point. Because we have got a struggling economy. We literally want to go together. Unless you want to sabotage the government of the day, you want to sabotage the economic efforts that we've put in. If you start talking about an economy, or rather, and I love how Fred is actually putting it, that at an agreed time. I am hoping that that agreed time will not be tomorrow, and then that becomes the catchphrase. Then we start pushing people to go back to the streets. The economy, all of us agree that we just trying to actually recover. There's so much that is working, and we'll need a little bit of stability. We cannot be a country. You know, this country called Kenya is a country, not an election. You know, since 2002, you come out of an election, you move straight into a referendum, and then there is a main one. And every time we've come after election, the term referendum has actually become quite the catchphrase. So this is a country that needs time to work the instruments of state, to administer state, to give out leadership, to ensure that we deliver for our people. But if we really are going to, every time we get into an election, we've wasted 1 year in streets, even though, as an individual, I was opposed to the NADCO process. I've accepted the outcome, but I was opposed to that particular process because if you look at that report, we seated here could actually have done it without the loss of 60 lives. That report does not address the 60 lives that were unnecessarily put to harm's way. It does not speak to the mothers and fathers who have got graves to, as the only proof, or rather as the outcome of this particular process. It was not necessary for us to waste resources, to destroy businesses, to actually put people in harm's way, to create widows and come up with orphans for this. Because that, if I've taken time, finally I've read the whole of 296, this is the summary of the 8 pages, and I've looked at it. That report is not worth the economic destruction, the lives lost, and really where we've put the country at.
Is it consequential though? Do you feel that something will come out of it?
That's what I'm saying, that at least that the people who went to sit down were not carried away with emotions and came up with a near practical. I still have a feeling that a few things are not necessary. Like, for example, I still feel, and Mheshimiwa is here, that Parliament for us is the weakest link in our governance. There's the 3 functions that Parliament does not take seriously, almost the 4 of them. Well, representation, they do well. You're going to hear the voice of the people from the ground come out quite, leaders speak eloquently about that. Legislation, there's quite a number of them who really don't pay attention to it. You will hear them talking about a legislation that has been in Parliament as if it's a new thing once it's controversial out there, and it's been in Parliament for a very long time. Then the issue of oversight for me is where the biggest problem is. That on that, Parliament, literally, a number of them are focused on CDF so much. And I've done a paper that actually links to the weakness of Parliament today. What makes Parliament blunt today is the obsession with the CDF. Okay. Of course, the Supreme Court has ruled, and in respecting the principle of separation of powers, I still feel that it's not in the best interest of strengthening governance, actually entrenching CDF in law, because Fred, somehow a lot of his colleagues are not legislators. They are not interested in oversight. They are CDF managers. They do very good management of CDF, and with that alone.
And I have a question on that because the NGCDF is part of this discussion. And Article 255 talks about those things that would necessitate a referendum. Is anything that would touch on the functions of Parliament. The functions of Parliament do not include development. And it could be argued that, in a sense, we are seeking to broaden the role of Parliament. That apart from oversight, representation, and legislation, we are also giving Parliament a hand in some of the executive functions at the grassroots level. Do you think that if at all this issue of NGCDF was to be subjected to a referendum, that then Parliament would be jolted into action? Bwana Mutunga.
I will talk about CDF later on, but let me just respond to a few issues that have come up. Okango said something that needs to be elaborated to Kenyans, that the proposals in the BBI are the ones that have been put into the NADCO report. I would like him to remember that we are discussing as Kenya, and Kenyans know their problems. And the fact that a problem was highlighted in BBI does not make it new, does not mean that it is now wrong to discuss it at this particular point in time. It is not wrong. So if we are real and we are realistic, if BBI had anything that probably could have picked out, then of course some of the issues in BBI would have found their way into this report. So there is absolutely nothing wrong with that.
That's true. That's true.
Secondly, the approach that has been taken by NADCO in arriving at near implementable issues, all of them, most of them, is because we are now discussing as a government versus the opposition, you know, this particular bipartisan team, plus taking into context of the issues of all Kenyans. Kenya is talking. Let's look at BBI. Who was the driver of BBI? Why the BBI in the first place? What was the prime mover of BBI? What was the idea behind the BBI? We all know it. And that's why it was rejected by Kenyans. The third issue, you know, when you are discussing as a people within the government setup, then the government is conscious of the realities of the day. We cannot go that direction because either it is too expensive at this point in time or it is unimplementable at this point in time. We have to be considerate and we have to be realistic that some things will not work at this particular point in time because we are living today. We are not making proposals for tomorrow. Mm-hmm. So some of the issues actually could not go very far if they sounded unreasonable, if they sounded unrealistic, and if they sounded unimplementable at the point in time.
Bwana Mutubwa, from a legal perspective, of course, many people believe they have understood the Constitution and they know the provisions and they understand what can go past through Parliament or would necessitate a referendum. But when you get back to the courts and you're challenged, that's when the issue comes up. The issue of CDF has been declared unconstitutional by
Absolutely.
It would be a second time that we are attempting, and probably it's one of those things that will be challenged in the courts. Do you think that if at all that would be, it would be subject to a referendum, that probably it would change the conversation?
Let me tell you this. First of all, when I want to agree with my brother here, and what he says is that the practical solutions given in this document, the NADCO report, is because the authors seem to think with their minds and not their heart. And I repeat, every time as a country we go into constitutional legislative policy changes that are based on emotion, ethnic, political expediency, we get it wrong and we end up with unconstitutional laws. The BBI is a perfect example, driven by very many passionate, particularly that formation that was there last year, driven by that passion, driven by that political persuasion. They went, and I want to say this, and I want to say Okango remembers that, you know, it is not only this government that has the monopoly of having unconstitutional actions. Unconstitutional actions were there even in the BBI, and now, and even the CDF. Now, the CDF has been introduced in this report, I think, in my view, as a sweetener, as a sweeter deal for members of parliament to look at this report and say, there is something for you also. So if you throw away this thing, you throw away the baby and the bathwater and you lose everything. So it is supposed to be some bait for them. What we need to do as a country, as leaders, we must be sensitive. Leaders of this country, members of parliament, the executive must be sensitive. And what I suggest is that we look at what is practically possible with our heads, not our hearts. Let's not ask ourselves whether we need an office of a leader of opposition because it serves a certain person. Is it good for us? And if we see that it is good for us in the architecture of our governance, then it works for us. Do we need a CDF? I don't think personally that we need CDF. Let legislators do what they're supposed to do.
Do you believe, do you think that it broadens the role of parliament?
It does not. It actually shrinks the role of parliament because the parliamentarian is putting up a borehole, is also supposed to oversight the contractor, oversight the people who give the money. The obsession with CDF money is really to make members of parliament look good on the ground. That is the point. It has nothing to do with the ability to create opportunities for people and do projects. That can be done by anybody, including the county government. The point here has always been that a member of parliament wants to be seen to be visible doing certain things because our electorate expect to see the member of parliament doing some things. You will be told that our member of parliament has not participated in development. So the CDF gives a very convenient opportunity for members of parliament to shine at the local level.
Let's allow Bwana Mutunga to
Fred, to justify CDF, just before Moish comes in, let us remember that CDF for us was a pilot project for devolution. It was our way of taking power to the ground and resources at a time when we didn't have a framework. We now have got the constitution that has given us a proper devolved situation. Now what has happened is that policies, if you go around the policy cycle, every time you do the evaluation, you will realize that sometimes a policy becomes, really has got other consequences that you didn't think about. And in the case of CDF, at that particular time in 2004 when we were actually taking it in, is that we really were moving away from the imperial presidency and the temptation of always having Nairobi control the ground. And CDF has actually done good work. But do you know on the other side what it has done? It has denied a lot of these guys the oversight freedom, because sometimes even the executive has used it to tether them so that then you don't say, if you speak so loudly, then we remind you that you've been using it. So in law...
Does it affect...
In law, by the way, they've actually played around. And unfortunately, I worked on that particular bill. In law, we've actually ensured that there's nothing on them. But do you know that if a member of parliament died today, you actually constitute a fresh committee? Do you know that? Yet, they are not there. But de facto, we know that you cannot even sit on the committee if you are... If you're not the MP's friend.
Let's allow Mutunga to talk about this.
No, I don't think so. So, CDF, why did CDF come in? CDF was configured because there was the realization that there are certain things that are critical for development and they're not getting sufficient redress. I want to talk about education, for instance. If education was handled the way we handle healthcare today, how many of our children would we be pushing to have this great enabler, to go through a process that will enable them to become better people in the future? I want to start by saying that CDF is not managed by the Member of Parliament. There's a CDF board. There's a whole infrastructure for management of CDF. The idea is that that's like, as I said, is like devolving resources to a sub-county level or to a constituency level. And the management of those resources is bestowed upon the CDF board. So what the Member of Parliament does basically is to try and look at how do we exercise equity at this particular level? How do we make sure that everybody here gets the opportunity to have their children educated, because CDF have two major functions, education and security. And then how can we make sure that security issues are taken care of properly?
It is the legality of this issue about CDF and whether or not it affects the functions.
Assessing the CDF vis-a-vis the counties. If you go to most of the counties, you will not see development. But CDF is apparent everywhere. So it is actually a fund that is, because it is right there with the MP, the Member of Parliament is oversighting these activities.
So it is an oversight role.
Three quick things and facts in the proposal. But before I say that, let me make a correction. BBI was not rejected by the people. It was rejected by the courts. It passed the 47 county assemblies, National Assembly and Senate, and overwhelming endorsement of the signatures. Now, but that's neither here nor there. The issue of National Constitutional Development Fund,
it will just be one.
Look at the report, paragraph 698, paragraph 699. Azimio actually makes observation and says that these funds will bring conflict. And therefore, Azimio in that report recommends that the constitution be amended to provide for only the two levels of government and can make these funds to be shared vertically or horizontally. Therefore, Azimio respects, there is a court decision on that fact. If you listen to the submission by AG Emeritus, and I was there at that time, Amos Wako, he actually said the same thing. But The committee observes that these funds are very popular with the people. The committee observes that there have been certain development, particularly from the national government, affected by these funds. And therefore, it's about the people. And the recommendation is to regularize these funds so that they are in alignment with the Constitution of Kenya 2010. That is what is there. So we can argue here and say it's unconstitutional, it is this, but the observation, and even the people that appeared, if you look at all those submissions from the stakeholders, they actually argue that they have benefited more through these funds than any other fund. While the observation of the committee also that there will be conflict of interest. So what do? The committee recommends a way of ensuring that there is no conflict and these funds also are entrenched such that they do the same purpose they're supposed to do. And lastly, I know for sure that this report will generate a lot of debate. I know for sure there are so many good things about the report, but also there are certain issues that are unfinished, as we said. What we would hope to see is that the good proposals in this report on the formulated issues be taken up immediately so that people start enjoying the benefit of this report. And the work in progress also be finished. And that's why, as Emil has said, we know there's unfinished business, the cost of living. We shall endeavor to ensure that we finish that business of the cost of living the best way we can.
Okay, because Kenyans are worried and they want to know, are we going to a referendum? It's a very basic question. Is there enough push? Is there any urgency for referendum? Are there any proposals in this that would create an urgency for us to have a referendum probably before 2027? And that's why I'm asking before, because I know if at all the issue of the CDF would necessitate a referendum, then the push towards that would actually be more.
Just as I respond to that, I need to remind Okango, and he is a lawyer of note, he would know this, that number one, all sovereign power belongs to the people, and the people can exercise it either directly or through delegated, and one of those delegation is what you will find even in the judiciary. It is the people who defeated BBI. Because the judiciary is, they exercise delegated power from the people. And two, it is the people who went, the judiciary did not make a decision of its own. It's the people who went to the judiciary and told them that we are offended here, please intervene. So the people defeated BBI. BBI was twofold. It had two things to do. Number one, it was supposed to bring in Raila Odinga as the president. And number two, it had a few icing on the cake, like what
That's
BBI is. Like what BBI is
BBI was not meant to bring
to this particular process. It was the icing on the cake.
That's Kenya Kwanza propaganda, but it's okay.
As we move around, you will actually realize that the people then further defeated BBI during the elections. So BBI was defeated on two fronts by the people. That actually has to be very clear. On the referendum, it's important. I will support us having a referendum, but together with the elections. There is no need to have, it's not even wise. It will be insensitive of us as a people that when people are struggling with the cost of living, I know that by 14th, at least fuel will come down by about 7 to 10 shillings, but still that is not.
Should we hold you to that?
Yes, hold me, bring me here on 14th.
Yes.
Fuel will actually come down between 7 shillings and 10, but I still feel that we
Remember
have
there's
got much
17
more.
billion?
You just need to be one person who knows how much we bought the fuel, the levies we tax. That one, anyone can sit at home and work out. Unless something happens, unless Okango goes to the streets again, the fuel will come down. So,
By
but
7 to 9 shillings.
Yes, 7 to 9 shillings, fuel will come down. Of course, flour has gone down. Now they don't want us to talk about flour, but unga has actually gone down. Last year when we were here, we were talking about flour repeatedly.
We're due for a break. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll be giving our panelists time to give their final remarks. And do stand by. We'll be moving to the Green Park Railways, Nairobi, as the Kenya Kwanza administration marks 1 year of the Hustler Fund. We'll be doing that shortly. But after we get our final remarks. You're still watching Morning Cafe on TV 47. Let's take this break now. Welcome back. You're watching TV47. This is Morning Cafe, and we continue with the conversation here with Frederick Okango, Dr. Wilfred Mutubwa, Dr. John Mutunga, and Arnold Maliba. And we want to give this gentleman a chance to give their final remarks on most of the issues that we've discussed. I know there's some that you still feel you need to talk about. Let's start with you, Dr. Mutubwa.
Yes, I think on my part, my final comment is to say Kenyans have come of age. We now have dialogue instead of street fights. We have dialogue instead of exchanging words. And the words of the Prime Minister, former Prime Minister Raila Odinga yesterday, just underline how far we have come. The fact that we can disagree and agree to disagree on content and on processes, but agree that we have to move forward from some draft, from a document, in itself demonstrates leadership. So I want to laud the leader of opposition, but I also want to laud the president for allowing this process to come through. My view is that the people of Kenya have a working draft. Academics, Arnold will tell you that you have a working draft and then you build on it. I think it is now time to implement. It is not time for us to go into a plebiscite. The reason must prevail, and reason prevails when you say, look, we have a country to run, we have mouths to feed, we have electricity to generate, we have fuel to bring down, Unga is coming down, I am told. So the point is this, let's have a situation where, as a people, we are not fixated with political issues throughout. Politics is part of life, but more importantly is to put food on the table, to have children go to school, and many things which make us run an economy. I think this document we have is a beginning point. It captures the essence of the Kenyan spirit today as we speak. We may not all agree about everything in that document, but we agree that we have identified our problems. We have begun moving in the right direction. Fred, lastly, I just want to say this. A referendum has had the effect, whether it is positive or negative in this country, in splitting people right down the middle. We do not want to see that. The peace and tranquility we enjoy today may help us move some of our problems away going into 2027. There will be an election. People will come and say what this government has done or not done. But it may not be opportune 1 year into a dispensation to say that we want to now test the waters. I know politically it is opportune for the opposition to try and test the waters. But for the people who are actually working every day to make their lives better, I think the focus now should be to do some of the things we can do without a referendum and park those things to an opportune time. Okango put it very well, to an opportune time. So there is always an agreed time. An agreed time is the opportune time. Okay. Thank you very much.
Well, Arnold, you go next.
Number one, it's important to tell Kenyans that dialogue won. There was no need for violence. There was no need for fights. These issues are largely in Article 10 and Article 43 of the Constitution. We can talk to each other without necessarily harming each other and harming our country. So what failed, and those who really, even from Azimio, those who are opposed to the report, did not want dialogue. For them, it was a deal log that they were looking for. Deal, and then you can hyphenate that and then add LOGE. But the dialogue won. Nusumkate attempts and sabotaging the country failed. We as a people were able to talk to each other. And you realize that when we talk, there's little bit of, there's nothing. It's, at least when we are reasonable, we talk easily. I want to thank Kalonzo Musyoka specifically for bringing in a little bit of reason. And I think it's Seneca or, I don't know that it's Seneca or somebody else who said that if it were not for the elders advising the youth, there would be no state. At least that becomes very apparent when you look at what was happening during the NADCO report. Young people were a little bit quite on the edge of sanity and everything else. But being an elder, I think over time, he continuously reminded them that. So the people won. But the other thing we really need to also talk about is to remind Kenyans that we don't have any other country. If you look at our online platforms and everything else, you will think that our country is burning. We are the type of people that are going out there and literally tearing down our country just to feel good and for purposes of exercising our Article 33 and the Bill of Rights that we have anyway. But it's important we remind Kenyans that this is the country we have. You can say you want to leave this country, but wherever, for all of you who have traveled, including myself, there is nothing good elsewhere because you will always be reminded that you are not from those particular places. If this country goes down, you will not be welcome anywhere. Finally, The economy is a little bit, it's been tough, but things are stabilizing. We expect that at the current trend, fuel is going to be reducing with about 10 shillings up to probably February. We hope, because that's the only other tenants, there are about 8 tenants to the cost of life, the cost of living. Food already is taken care of. Fuel is actually coming down. And unless something else happens at the global level, we will see about 10 shillings reduction up to February. After that, of course, then we get to the price where the price per barrel normally gets to the pivot. So let's support the government. Let's also work. This country is where it is because of the efforts we do as individual people, and then supported by government's action in policy, administrative action, and so forth.
Asante sana Maligba. Okango, you go next.
We strongly disagree with the Kenya Kwanza assertion that the cost of living is as a result of bad policy on subsidizing consumption. And we tell them that it involves so many things. Corruption, it involves cost of transport, it involves cost of energy, it involves mismanagement and uneconomic use of public resources, as has been manifested in this regime. We also tell the people that the report is out there, it's the beginning. While we agree with a number of issues in that report, we also agree to disagree that the cost of living is important and should be addressed. We are also telling the public that this regime has shown they are not interested in lowering the cost of living, and they have shown that they are going to overtax Kenyans, and that's why we have made cost of living as the next phase of the struggle. The people of Kenya, you are not alone. We are with you, but we are saying, as we work with you, we will use every means practical and constitutional to allow this country to move forward, to allow you to put money in your pocket, to allow you mama mboga, you boda boda, you mtu wa mkokoteni, to enjoy the benefits of being this country so that we can be proud Kenyan. We will not be ruled, we will not be governed by propaganda that we have seen, because when you do that, the microeconomics and the exchange rate will expose you. This government, this regime has been exposed.
Okay. Dr. Mutunga, you wrap it up for us.
Friend, I think Kenyans are entitled to the truth. And when you listen to Azimio, you will realize that there is deliberate violation of Article 35(2) of the Constitution. I think Kenyans need to be asking, is it true? Is it correct? Is it are we talking about the realities? Because if you give, the pronouncement by Raila Odinga does not necessarily want to take this country anywhere. And the emotive pronouncement even by my friend here, Okango. The fact that they want to could prefer, going for using other means. What does other means mean? What does it mean? It means going away from. At least we have an opportunity as a country to show, especially our neighbors, that we can talk. They look at us and think we are mad people. We tear each other, we fight always. And the freedom of expression in this country has done us a lot of, not so much of good, because we seem to be tearing our country apart with our mouths, what we say. People talk about patriotism, but you don't find it in what they say, in what they do, in what they profess, in what they propose for our people. I think the NADCO report has been produced by people who sat down and thought about the issues presented by Kenyans. What is possible? What can be done now? What can be done in the future? Nobody says referendum is not necessary, because we are likely to change the basic structure, and it's a requirement.
Okay.
So Article 255 has to apply here. But it doesn't have to apply today. You don't have to, now we go for referendum, because we have all agreed that now, you see, the cost of living has been huge and very succulent fodder for opposite for Azimio. Because, and the cost of living cannot be brought down, you know, on a single day. It's a process.
And in a dialogue.
And we cannot do it by going out to the street. We can do it by doing the kind of things that the government is doing.
Okay. Thank you so
Subsidizing production, ensuring that the cost of production is low, ensuring people have food, ensuring that systems are working.
Fred,
Thank you so
just
much.
before we move, before no, let's that,
working.
20 seconds.
They are not working.
The truth is this, that when you subsidize production, the 18 million bags extra that we have produced is evidence that it works.
Okay, okay. Dr. Mutunga, MP Tigania West, Arnold Maliba, public policy analyst, Dr. Wilfred Mutubwa, legal expert and political commentator, and Frederick Okango, Azimio spokesperson. Our panelists this morning, thank you so much, gentlemen, for your very well-considered opinions on this matter, especially on the Azimio response to the National Dialogue Committee report. And let me go through this editorial comment as we come to the end of this session. Now, the infiltration of ethnic politics in Kenya's public universities is a concerning and regressive trend that jeopardizes the core principles of academic integrity, meritocracy, and progress. Statistics reveal that up to 80% of employees in certain universities are drawn from the immediate localities, a blatant disregard for equal employment opportunities and merit-based recruitment. This practice, as highlighted by reports by the Auditor General, not only stifles diversity, but also compromises the quality of education and research output. Instead of nurturing academic excellence and groundbreaking research, these institutions become breeding grounds for mediocrity and stagnation. Yet, universities are meant to be fountains of knowledge, innovation, and intellectual discourse, where diversity of thought and expertise converge to advance society. When these institutions become entrenched in local village politics, prioritizing ethnic ties over qualifications, it hampers their ability to achieve their true potential. The promotion of ethnic enclaves within the universities further undermines the national objective of unity and diversity. It hampers the creation of conclusive or conducive learning environments where students and faculty from diverse backgrounds can thrive and contribute meaningfully to society. It is crucial for universities to break free from the shackles